a programming job at Lifetree Software, the creator of Volkswriter. This is a reach into your memories, some of you. The first commercial software presented at the first IBM PC World Fair. And then he followed his mother into teaching, delivering training not only for Les, but earlier for Luke Holman's Innovation Games. Earlier in this millennium, Greg ran the West Coast for ThoughtWorks, before he moved to Paris in 2006, where he worked for Craig Larman of Les and became the first Les trainer. Greg loves to garden and to hike. He tells me, he once planted 30,000 trees when he was 21 or so. He didn't tell me why. I'm very curious about that. Greg Hutchings will be delivering one of his rare public US-based Les trainings next week, via Zoom, of course. He's not coming to San Francisco until the lockdown breaks. But his last public training in the U.S. was in 2017. So this is a rare opportunity next week. There are still openings as of this posting, and I'll paste that into the chat in a moment, and his contact information. So we of Enterprise. Enterprise Agile San Francisco are excited and honored to have him here to discuss the Agile organizational design. So with that, I'll mute myself and turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Ron. And thanks, Jay. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I had hoped to be in San Francisco. I miss it very much. As much as I love Paris, I left my heart in San Francisco. And on a personal note, and this is very, very personal, but I'm very transparent. My girlfriend and I broke up yesterday, so I've been in a bit of a rough spot, and I'll do my best to give you a good experience tonight. For me, it's 9 p.m. But what I'd like to do is have a much more interactive session than I might have otherwise had. And so we can use this as a session for talking about organizational design. I do have a lot of experience in it, and I'd like to try and answer questions that you might have. I think one easy way to do that is through the chat. I'm going to go through a little bit of material with you, but I won't spend too much of the time doing that because I don't want to bore you with slides. Also, just a brief comment on those 30,000 trees. So the ones behind me are actually about 1 kilometer from where I live here on the outskirts of Paris. And my daughter and I spent a lot of time there trying to get out of the city into nature. And I actually really did plant 30,000 trees, but they were pretty small trees. They were, about as tall as your screen, probably bigger than your iPhone if you're on an iPhone screen. And they were in the mountains of Oregon and Idaho. I was in a tree planting co-op, which is sort of a pre-Agile self-organizing group. Called the Hodads, and I took a quarter off from college and we went out into the woods and planted trees wherever the snow was about to melt. And I was in better shape at that point in my life than I have ever been if we're talking about physical body design. But let's talk a little bit about organizational design. What I do is I coach and train usually large, complex organizations in how to become more agile, more flexible, more adaptive. And that usually involves some significant changes in structure. For a company to decide to turn over the keys to its structure to someone who they don't know very well, it takes a leap of faith. And there's probably 9 out of 10 companies I talk to who aren't really at the point that they're ready to make such a change. The organizational design is one element of getting ready to have a new culture in a new organization. And what I like to say, and what Craig Larman, who I've learned a lot from, likes to say is that culture follows structure. Some transformation techniques don't involve changing the structure of the organization. And there's a hope that if you somehow hack the structure, that things will be different. And what I've found, and I think a number of us have found, is that the hierarchical structure and role definition of a traditional organization will tend to resist change and reassert itself no matter how much training and coaching you do. And if you actually change the structure, it makes it much, much easier for behavior to change and culture to change. This is not just the hierarchical structure, but the departmental structure, the number of roles, their definition, how they interact, and how decisions are made. So there are structures that control governance and how decisions are made. And in an Agile organization, we try to make them delegated to an appropriate level. There's also, I think, at the very beginning of this talk, it's important to differentiate theory and practice. So as a less trainer, large scale Scrum, I spend a little time talking about theory, and I think Ron's appreciation of me, and that was very kind of you, Ron, what you said. It might be that you appreciate more of a practitioner's point of view, or someone who has seen a lot and adjusted things to the context to try to make things work. I feel like it's best for me to work hand in hand with people who are very strong theoretically, and they kind of pave the way, define a perfection vision that would be very attractive. And I then go step by step and try to get as far as I can, which is usually somewhere other than the ideal theoretical direction. So let me give you a little bit of background. I'll share my screen. And at any point, if you have a comment you'd like to make, I guess, can everyone unmute themselves if they'd like to?
Yes.
Because and if it gets too chaotic, then we could try to reduce that. But I'd like to have people to be able to say anything freely if you decide to unmute yourself. That's okay.
Terrific.
Okay, just a moment here. Okay, I think what I'll do is actually just a moment here. I'm going to just share my whole desktop, then I can more easily jump between things. All right, so I prepared a few slides, and I'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes on these slides just to give you a little bit of an overview. So organizational design principles and patterns. And a little about myself. You can see what I look like here. That's a picture of me a few years ago with my daughter, Sophie. She's now 13, and that's about 10 years ago. I do training and consulting, active parenting, and I have a company called Amelior Services, which also happens to have an office in Seattle. My sister lives there, and I get every chance I can to visit her, so I'll try and see you the next time I'm there, Ron. My company's name, Amelior, is based on the word to improve. So I always believe that we can improve, I can improve, we can all improve together, and I try to help people improve. I have a long experience in Agile, Lean, Scrum, Kanban. Been doing Agile since the 90s, and I've been around a while. I've done a lot of different roles. I think I've had pretty much every role in software development companies, beginning at Lifetree, as Ron pointed out, which was in the early 80s. A little bit more about my company. You can take a look at the website if you'd like, and I'll share these slides after the presentation. So some concerns about organizational design. What sort of size of an organization are we talking about? I've worked with companies, Nokia, for example, the wireless division had 10,000 developers and 1,000 system testers in 40 countries, working on the same base of code, about 200 million lines of code. And I've started up a company where I was the first employee, only one, and then we grew up to 5, and then finally grew up to about 35. A company of that size still does have organizational design concerns, but they're much simpler than what I work with mostly. The last 3 or 4 years, I've been working intently in autonomous driving with BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Those two companies, as you know, are German companies. They have some cultural aspects that are traditionally country culture, and the automotive industry has some cultural aspects. There tends to be quite a bit of hierarchy in these companies, quite a bit of specialization, expertise, and agility is a relatively new thing in the automotive industry, probably partly because of all of the hardware dependency, partly because things have gone pretty well in the past, so why change? And some of the experience I will share is from those companies. Another mobility company I've worked with in Germany that is quite different than those two is called Flixbus. I don't know if any of you have heard of Flixbus. It's a company that may seem to be a bit like Greyhound, but it's actually a lot more like Uber. It's like a B2B Uber. They don't actually own buses, but they have an app and it helps you find a seat on a bus, and it does least cost routing, and they've done a lot to kind of disrupt and revolutionize bus traffic. And that company's let me share a lot of details of their reorganization, which I coached, and I'm going to go through a case study in some detail about what we did at Flixbus. So size is one concern. Site strategy is the company centralized, distributed? I think these days with COVID, we're all distributed, but that's not so much by design as by accident. And it's a gigantic experiment occurring that really needs to be analyzed. What's the structure of the company, and what do you want to design the structure to be? Many companies have an organizational design, a functional design. So departments are organized by skill, and at the top of that department is someone who has a lot of skill in that particular function. And is such a structure customer-centric? Uh, I think not, personally. So if you think about time to market and agility being a way to rapidly react, if the structure of the company allows the voice of the customer to very quickly be heard and responded to, the company will, by design, be more agile. If the company structure is such that is somebody having trouble hearing? I'm not watching the chat notes, so maybe I should check and see if there's any issue. How many levels are the hierarchy? So you could have 100 people and 0 levels, or just a flat level, or you could have 3 or 4 levels. Often the more hierarchy you have, the more distortion there is of communication. Companies often have a policy on how many direct reports a person might have, and frequently that is challenged in an organizational redesign. To be flatter, you probably need then to have more direct reports. Some companies that I've worked with or worked for, Ron mentioned ThoughtWorks. I found at ThoughtWorks, with about 1,300 employees at the time, 60 or 70% of the people did not know who they work for. It wasn't relevant. So there are companies that are at the outlier position of hierarchical structure when it's not really very important anymore. And then there's the question of roles. Are there many or are there few? Are people more generalists or are they more specialists? And what is better for an agile organization? The governance, how are decisions made? Are they delegated? Are they centralized? Are they, depending on the type of decision, delegated? And how durable is the design of the organization? Is it a structure that can be built for the long term and stabilized? Or is it a structure that is continuously changing? An aside at this point is the impact of a project mentality. So if you ramp up and ramp down projects, you effectively ramp up and ramp down teams, usually, and that destabilizes team dynamics. So something to keep in mind. Who designs the organization? So is it designed by management, by consultants, by the people themselves who will be in the organization? And what do they specify about the design? Is it just a hierarchical structure, or does it have to do more with how people will operate? What about the membership of this organization? How do you include people? How do you exclude? How do you associate with others? What sort of connections do you have? How do you onboard people? How do you offboard people? So these are some questions to have in mind. I'd like to stop for a moment and see if you're with me. I'm going to switch screens for a moment here because I maximize the screen and don't see your faces well. Chance for any comments or questions?
So there's one question in the chat, Greg, that says from Jen Baltas, who says, I would enjoy the opportunity to discuss the intersection between senior leadership and agile managers and teams. Waterfall was good for senior leadership because of the feeling of upfront confidence in what was being delivered, less ambiguity. What strategies do you recommend to build trust and confidence between senior leaders and teams in a more ambiguous agile space?
Well, that's a good question. It's a bit of a complex question. One of the best things is just to have FaceTime. So I would not recommend a survey or an occasional assessment by middle management that's passed to senior management that's passed to the top management. I would recommend that top management participate in an overall retrospective, all hands meeting or open space, and that there really be an open door policy. The last part of that question again was how to create trust. Was that in the question?
Yeah, to build trust and confidence between senior leaders and teams in a more ambiguous agile space.
Yeah. Well, I think that the trust goes both ways, and there has traditionally been a transfer of responsibility or a transfer of risk in a project mentality from people who'd like to have something happen at the top and people who are assigned to do that at a lower level. And there can be a kind of mirage of reliability and confidence in a traditional project approach that eventually disappears as you drive down the road and you realize it was just an illusion of control, and actually it's late, it's low quality, it's not what you expected. That's a very common outcome, and that really shouldn't be a surprise. I think the reason it's a surprise is because of small projects that are hidden underneath people whose reward system depends on them obtaining on time, on budget, full scope delivery, which is generally not possible. So there's a kind of a temporary illusion of control. And then when things don't work out the way that they had been hoped to, you fire that person and replace them with someone who can get it done. And it was interesting when I got hired at ThoughtWorks in San Francisco in 2003. Uh, I was hired as a kind of a client principal initially, a kind of a director of projects. And a guy said to me, "You know what your job is?" And I said, "No, Matt, what is it?" And he said, "Well, Greg, when things go badly, we'll fire you and we'll replace you, and it'll protect all the developers." So uh, I think understanding that product development, software development, if it's true R&D, is not possible to estimate perfectly, and that it's an empirical process is very important. And so I think building trust occurs when people understand through systems dynamics and systems thinking and interaction with people who are hands-on what their real struggles are. And conversely, when people who are hands-on in the trenches or doing development understand the quandaries and difficulty of top management, it's really important that it be bidirectional. I see my friend and colleague Claudia Baumgarten is on. Nice to see you, Claudia. She's
Hello.
calling in from Europe as well. And I saw a few other less trainers who were on here earlier too. So it's nice to have cohorts here. Any other questions, or I'll go along? All right. If you don't mind continuing as you just did, Ron, that was helpful. Here's a picture on structure, and this is from the less approach. So I'm not only a less trainer, I don't always use less, but it gives you an idea that I find useful, especially the top little box here. So organizing by customer value. If you are trying to introduce Agile or improve the agility of your organization, and the reason for being Agile is not to just be more efficient or faster, but actually to be able to adapt faster to changing needs, changing markets. The source of those changes is usually either competitors or customer need. And so if you're organized according to that, you can be much more responsive than if you're organized according to, let's say, technology stacks or skills. Can anybody suggest why that might be? Is it intuitive to you? You can put a thumbs up if it's intuitive. I think I can see a few people's faces here. Yeah, so it's intuitive, I think. If you are organized in a bunch of different departments, let's say sales, customer service, marketing, product management, R&D, QA, operations, finance, uh, uh, for a message from the customer to get to someone who can actually do something about it, there's probably a few different handoffs. Each of those handoffs, you have information loss, you have delay, and by the time it actually gets to people who can do something about it, it may not be needed anymore, or it may be more complex than it was. And most certainly the customer will be unhappy about the delay. You can think about it from the point of view of a phone system when you call a company and want to get to somebody who can solve a problem for you, and that common frustration we have that you never actually get through. So if you reorganize by customer value, you can create long-lived teams, feature teams, who understand the customer context and can, at their best, directly respond to a customer within a very short period of time, actually making changes to the product and distributing them, at least understanding the problem. So I'll go on a little bit here in a moment, but feature teams are an important organizational design concept. And I mentioned a few adjectives quickly, but long-lived is very important. There's a good book by Richard Hackman on teams, and he's a Harvard professor who studied the dynamics of teams in many different industries. And in the industry of software development, he's found the length of time a team needs to stay together to reach their peak productivity. And it's probably surprising, but it's 5 to 7 years. So if in your organization teams are ramped up and ramped down every few months or every year or two, you're not ever reaching your peak performance. So how does a team that stays together for such a long time not get bored? In an agile organizational design, teams pull work, and that work might change. So they may be continuously learning new things. And that's important for morale and for team dynamics. It has to do with how work is delegated or how it's distributed. And the organizational structure then is quite important. What are the roles, the levels of hierarchy? In the transformations that I have led, there's often a reduction as many as half or more of the levels of hierarchy are removed. It doesn't mean that people are removed, but it means that they are now much closer to the top management. And that gets back a little bit to the trust question earlier. If you know someone pretty intimately and you see them often, you're more likely to trust them than if you've never seen them and they've never seen you. And then you just hear about their reputation. So by flattening the structure, you can create greater intimacy internally and greater accessibility externally. There's a concept.
Greg,
Yes.
there's a request to so you're in presenter view instead of slide view.
Oh,
So
am I?
what we're seeing is both the current slide and the next slide.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
And
thanks.
so if we could just see the current slide bigger,
Yeah.
that would be, I think, helpful. Probably
Yeah.
at least like phones.
Yeah, no, thank you for telling me that. I can see, I need to switch screens because I can see the, I thought you were seeing the presentation mode. And it's still the same case? Okay, let me try something else here.
We're not seeing you're sharing at all right now.
Yeah, I stopped the share for a second because I wanted to share the just the app instead of the whole screen. I think that will help. How is that now? Is it the same as it was, or is that better?
That's the same as it was.
Okay, just a second then.
Down. They will tell you the months. These are the months that make up the fourth quarter: October, November, December. So you mean we made so much in November? Right click again and drill down. If there's another level,
Is that, I don't know if that was technical support for me, but I appreciated it.
Yeah, that was somebody coming on unmuted.
He was talking about a right click though. Maybe that will actually coincidentally work for me.
Oh,
Let's see here.
in that case, I missed it.
I'm joking. I don't think it was meant for me, but is that, how's that now?
Oh, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. It was a bit slow. I'll thank the guy that was saying right click. That must have been what helped me there. There's often a concern when you go into an organization, you say, look, you know, you have a front end department, a back end department, you have a AI department and a machine learning department. And I want to remove those department heads from their roles. And I want to take all those people and I want to reorganize them into feature teams. And every feature team will be able to do front end, back end, AI, and machine learning. Now, if you talk to individuals who are going to be working with people of different skills, they might have mixed feelings about it, but most often they're open to the idea. The idea of a community is you could have a community for machine learning, a community for AI, for front end, back end, or other concerns. And your primary association would be with a feature team that's cross-functional. And your secondary association would be with a community that is a specialist group. You might spend 90% of your time in your feature team and 10% of the time in a community. Normally, this is what I do when I help organizations restructure. And the communities are open normally, and anyone can join a community that they're interested in. So you can learn about multiple things. Probably most people are familiar with the idea of a T-shaped person. So when a T-shaped person, you have a primary skill, a secondary, and a tertiary skill. And to support that organizationally, I like to refactor the HR department, if there is one, so that the skill set for each individual includes a primary, secondary, tertiary skill. And the annual review, if there still is one, asks about the progress in all these skills that people are developing, not just a single skill. When people become T-shaped, it's easier then to have teams that are T-shaped. And by having T-shaped teams, there's less handoff and better throughput. So shorter cycle time to the client, more reactivity, which is higher agility. Hopefully that makes sense. So when people realize that they're not going to be saying goodbye to all the other front enders, they'll be seeing them often in the community, but they'll be working primarily with people who are doing end-to-end development in a short time frame. Generally, that's acceptable. The people who usually don't like it so well are the people who are going to lose their department, people that they've hired, people who they manage, people who are loyal to them, hopefully. And those people need a special attention. some people suggest that unless we don't like managers and we want them all to go somewhere else. And I think that this is really naive and not accurate. I myself have been in management quite often, and so I'm empathetic to managers. And I think one thing we can do is to help give them options to learn other topics and to become better people leaders who are of multiple skills and not feel that they need to be better than everyone who's working for them, but instead help everyone working for them to become better. So there's a mindset change in middle and senior management that's quite important to enable a transformation to become effective. I think everyone is familiar with the Scrum Master role. I feel, and I've coached and taught SAFe. I understand SAFe quite well. I choose to teach and coach less more often, or an appropriate agile scaling framework that fits the client that doesn't have any external name, that becomes the client's agile method. That's actually my preference, is to look at these frameworks as a way to be inspired about what other people have found to work, and then structure and develop your organization in a way that suits your context, suits your preferences, but is informed by the experience of others. The reason I bring up the Scrum Master is in one single team Scrum, the role was pretty clear. The Scrum Master helps remove obstacles, checks to see how everybody's doing on the team and on the product owner and the people around in the ecosystem. And they are basically a high emotional IQ, service-oriented servant leader kind of role. If you then go to different scaling frameworks, in the case of SAFe, the Scrum Master stays at the level of the team. There's a Scrum Master per team. And in SAFe, you then have a release train engineer who is a kind of super Scrum Master with more authority and some handoff. And then you can go up higher to a value stream or a big solution, and higher still in the hierarchies that are suggested by SAFe. I'm uncomfortable with reintroducing hierarchies if they're unnecessary. And I try to resist re-implementing hierarchies. And if there is one already, then I work on coaching hierarchical command and control leaders to become servant leaders and enabling coaching. In the case of the company I mentioned, Flixbus, so I want to go into some more detail on their case study. One of the first actions that the co-founder CTO sponsored was his direct reports all gave up all of their management responsibilities. They stayed in the organization, but they became coaches, and they no longer could hire or fire anyone. They were there as senior experts. And then some new people-oriented managers were hired, and these people were not experts in their field. They were experts at psychology and people management, and they were people that are enjoyable to work for, that would take care of you, but wouldn't tell you what to do. So they very intentionally re-engineered the management mentality. And those roles are really quite similar to a Scrum Master. Unless we don't have any other proposed roles than Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Team. And so how do we scale? Well, the teams help the Product Owner, and you can have as many as 8 teams for a single Product Owner and less. And the Scrum Masters scale and become more concerned about organizational design and the complex political interactions in a company to increase collaboration, increase direct communication, and they become very important change agents. As a result, the kind of people that you want to have in a less setup as a Scrum Master probably were previously politically adept senior managers or mid to senior managers who understand why it's better for the organization to be in a service role rather than a directive role. So from my point of view, or a less trainer point of view, we've elevated the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the team roles to be able to scale. And for that reason, it's a bit confusing if people have heard about SAFe, and they stay at a low level or even a lower level, and they insert new roles on top of them. Reason that this bothers me is the more you put into other roles outside of the three that Scrum proposes, the less that those roles have left. So teams become more subservient. Scrum masters become more like task masters. Product owners become more like business analysts. And the original meaning of those roles in Scrum is lost. And I think that's why many people have reacted somewhat unfavorably to SAFe. That said, I think you can use SAFe and do a good job with it. I'm not religious about less, but I wouldn't suggest to do it just by the book. What I like is the idea that you own your organizational structure, that you don't rent it. So the organizational design process is quite important, as if you were designing your own home. You live in your organization. You should decide how many rooms it has, how many levels it has, how many hallways it has. And no framework should tell you exactly what you should do there. I'm going to go on a little bit and stop again for a second. Does anyone have a comment or question?
I had one. I wrote it in the chat, and the question is: how do you separate the definition of work for Scrum masters and Agile coaches in such a setup?
So in a setup that is less based, there is not a defined role of an Agile coach, and that's in fact what I do. So it is quite a relevant question. An Agile coach, in my mind, should be able to act in any of the roles, a team member, product owner, or Scrum master, and there should be an internal, long-lasting person in the organization, if I'm working as a consultant, who might be shadowing me or learning from me. So to me, a coach is an educator and a meta thinker rather than a permanent staff position. If it's a permanent staff position, then it may become equivalent to a Scrum Master. And in XP, the term was Agile Coach. There was no such thing as a Scrum Master in Extreme Programming. So there's many kinds of Agile coaches. It depends on what you meant. What did you mean in that question?
I was gonna, the question was asked in the context of such transformations as the one, transformations as the one you gave the example of, the one at Flixbus.
So the one at Flixbus, it was not a less transformation, and the Agile coach role was the equivalent of the Scrum Master. They didn't have a separate Scrum Master role. They did, however, have a manager role that I was describing earlier, and that was more of a people manager role, as I was mentioning, a facilitating role. So I think it depends on the organization. You could have some overlap, and a useful way to answer this question for yourself in your context is to draw a Venn diagram with circles that overlap, that are labeled for each of the roles in question, and then to take Post-it notes and have the team put responsibilities into each segment of the Venn diagram, and then discuss which responsibilities are shared, which are uniquely held by an individual. And if they're shared, what are the working agreements to make decisions between those two roles? So how do you make decisions? And that theme in general, collaborative decision-making, is a very important theme in coaching larger organizations into a new organization with new roles. If there's distributed responsibility, then, and you want to be efficient, you need to have ways to make decisions as a distributed group that are acceptable and that are more often good decisions rather than bad ones.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Right.
Is there any other?
Doug Levitt asked a question, and he should come on. He was asking if there's a short-term productivity hit when the transformation to T-shaped teams occurs.
Yes, almost always. And I didn't build this presentation or as an Agile transformation talk holistically, although maybe that would have been a good topic to suggest because it's what I do. When I first begin to engage with a client, I have a meeting called a informed consent meeting. And in that meeting, I talk about the pitfalls and the reasons why you might not want to do it, and what it's going to involve for the management and what it's going to involve for the people. And very rough estimate that I use as an example is it might be 6 to 12 months before it gets better. It'll probably get worse before it gets better. And can you take that hit? And then figure out what sort of scope of the organization might make sense to engage in a transformation. If it's more than, let's say, 50 to 80 people in development, it's probably a lot to swallow in one bite. And you probably want to choose a product or a domain dimension, a customer-centric dimension of the organization to go first. I wrote a case study that's on the Less Works website in my experience as the group head of product governance at BWin Party. It's an online gaming company. And in that context, there were 3 main product lines: sports, casino, and poker. It's a real money gaming company. And they had a 4th group that was the platform group. And so the initial discussion I had with them was on the organizational design. Does it look like it's customer centric? Well, yes, 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 and no. Casino, sports, poker, they're all games people play. The people who play them are not actually the same. Usually they're either poker or sports bettors. Everybody plays a little bit of casino games. So that's the customer segmentation. But what about this platform? There's nobody that uses it directly. It's behind the scenes. How can you really justify having that in a customer-centric organization? And I convinced the 2 co-founders and top management to get rid of that structure and to internally open source the platform code to be accessible by the customer-facing teams that develop products that generate revenue. The problem was that the problem in rationalizing that kind of organization is that a platform group doesn't generate any revenue. They're a cost center. They're not customer centric. So if you're trying to prioritize by customer value, you have an indirection, and you can assess the relative value for each of the customer facing groups and do something like a weighted sum of value divided by cost and get some kind of an optimization for a backlog for the platform group, but it's indirect and subject to a number of problems, including long queues and slow response time. In that case study, if you read it, you'll see there was a 6 to 9 month queue of waiting for changes to be made on the platform. And the effect of that was that the customer-facing groups would just duplicate the code and write their own code. So now you have multiple versions of code and everything gets slower and slower trying to maintain them. So there are a lot of consequences of the organizational design on how people develop and how they work around bottlenecks. It's better, I think, to have direct access through internal open source, where teams that are fielding a customer request can directly make the changes that are needed. This takes time, and that's another part of the informed consent meeting that's quite important. Feature teams that can do everything are all good and well, but how can you expect a small group of people to know how to do everything? If you're a big company, you've probably created a lot of complexity, and that complexity is hard to master. So either you master it or you reduce the complexity. And if you reduce the complexity, that means refactoring, simplification, which is a very important initiative if you're trying to scale. How can you simplify things? You'll still end up with some bodies of knowledge that can't be distributed or that are specialized in some component teams that are not customer facing. And this illustrates another important concept of the difference between a perfection vision, the kind of theoretical perfect organization, and the current reality, and the steps to get there. So we have a concept. I use a concept called a feature team adoption map, and you can scale it up as an organizational agility adoption map, showing on the one hand, where are you today in terms of knowledge of technology and skills, and where do you want to be tomorrow, and what are the steps you have to take to get there. And that's a very pragmatic, useful tool used at the level of the team. and then shared with management to understand the journey that the team is on, that they're choosing to become more versatile. And it helps build trust because there's mutual understanding about what's involved. Okay, any other questions, or I'll move along?
Yeah, I had one, says David.
Hi, David.
Greg, essentially you're talking about T skills over the last few minutes. Initially, I didn't hear the third skill you were talking about is having teams. Usually I focus on inter-team skills that they can work together, but you had a tertiary skill that I didn't hear when it comes to organizations. Could you repeat those skills again? 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, when I mentioned 1, 2, 3, I wasn't assigning a value to them. I was just suggesting that it's for a T-shaped person. It might be good for them to have 3 different skills. Let's say before I was a front-end developer, now I want to be a full-stack developer. I want to know front-end, back-end, and some machine learning or AI or some other UX design skill. In a cross-functional team of, let's say, 5, 6, 7 people, an organizational design blueprint, which I would work with the company to develop before flipping into the new organizational structure, we'd define how many teams do we need, roughly based on how much we think we're going to do into the future. It might mean that we have to hire more people or that we have too many people. Then how much skill do we need per team, roughly? What sort of teams? So with the ideal being that every team can do everything and the reality being something less than that, what sort of mix of teams would be possible to maximize versatility and provide the right kind of throughput for what we see coming up in the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, in terms of product development challenges. And that continuously changes. So over time, you go into new technologies, you go into new market segments, and everyone needs to upskill or learn new domain. And for that reason, also, I think at large scale, it's really important to have a longer term perspective on where you're going as an organization.
And then you mentioned as an organization, a potential collapsing the top end, which means more ownership on the bottom end.
Yes.
Surely that would involve a specific type of tertiary skill, if you like, to be a part of the company and take on more ownership.
Well, I think definitely at a lower level, quote unquote, in the organization, you need to have a sense of the mission of the company, the voice of the customer, the reason for why you do what you do, so that you're not following orders or doing just what somebody's asking you to do, but you're thinking about it proactively. What would delight the customer? What irritates the customer? What are the competitors doing? What is it like to actually use my product? For example, at BMW, where Claudia and I met, developing autonomous driving, at the end of every sprint in a less organization with 60-some teams would rotate, driving the car with the newly installed software, with stakeholders and top management, testing the newest features. And that happened every 2 weeks, and that rotated through the teams. And that gives the team members a sense of a chance to develop some new skills of kind of an outside-in view on their product.
Crash test dummy.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes there are false positives and false negatives. Suddenly the car will stop because it thinks it's seen something, but there was nothing there. And other times, unfortunately, the opposite thing happens. So which is why a lot of testing is important.
That's great.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that question. Any more questions or comments?
Kevin Goldsmith had a question around management. His question began.
I can ask it, Ron. I can maybe explain a little
go for
bit
it,
better.
Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about how the role of the manager changed. I've seen other companies do that. I think it's an interesting approach, but one of the things I'm always kind of looking at is by removing the role of the manager, and then are you choosing to remove the role completely, or what are you doing? A lot of companies end up taking the individual responsibilities of the manager and just distributing it across multiple people, because there are things managers actually do beyond just assign work to people. And it's just the thing I don't, when you make that choice, how do you make sure that the good things managers do are being taken care of, and you're not just kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
Well, I really appreciate you asking that question. So Claudia and I both talked to a mutual friend who is a manager, or was a manager until recently, at BMW. And he lived through this whole experience. He went from having a small team that he managed directly, always was a good manager, compassionate, considerate, intelligent, and provided technical direction as part of his previous role. That was part of, he was the leader of the team. And when the less adoption occurred, it occurred fairly radically. And he suddenly, instead of having a small team, had 70 or 80 direct reports. And in addition, he had no directive authority. It was stripped from him. And his life became hell, basically. And I had lunch with him the first time I met him, and he talked to me about what had gone on. And it's an example of when you go too far theoretically with fewer managers, not realizing that you're throwing out the good with the bad. I got involved there, not that I'm always right, but I got involved there after that had happened. And we reduced the number of direct reports to the managers, and we increased the leadership responsibilities, but not going from black to white, going back to a kind of a gray area. There's an old management technique called situational leadership, and it's been around for maybe 30 years. And the idea is that you, as a more enlightened manager, understand the situation and you respond appropriately. If the person needs quite a bit of direction, you give it to them. If they need a little guidance, you give it to them. If they just need some feedback, that's what you give them. And if they don't need anything from you and they're fine on their own, you leave them alone. But you are conscious of the situation. And to me, the consciousness I think management is still needed. I think it's situational as to how much is needed depending on the maturity and the skill of the people in the group. A friend of mine, the Innovation Games author, Luke Holman, who's in the Bay Area, I've learned a lot from him. He did something as product owner at his company Contenio, where they built innovationgames.com, and then which became Weave, which is in his backlog. He had an attribute which is fully delegated. And if he set that bit, the team would decide whether it was done or not. He wouldn't ever come back to look at it again. And if you're familiar with Jürgen Apollo's Management 3.0 on delegation poker, there's similar fine-tuned 7 levels of delegation. I use that frequently. So I do a lot of middle and upper management coaching, and I try to avoid the sort of terrible undesired side effect, where you introduce agility, you remove managers from their responsibility. They're still there. They sit back and they watch things explode, and they say, well, it's not my job anymore. And they're maybe not ill-intended, but they've been so discouraged that they feel the Scrum Masters will bite them if they try to intervene. And then eventually some who might have been a little bit less well-intended say, well, I told you so. You see, things are not going so well. You better put me back in a position of authority. So it's a subtle dynamic. And I think by having empathy for everyone in the organization, thinking first of the person as a person, not as their role, creating job safety helps people to change their mindset about their role. And then to have direct feedback, so that people can ask for help. It's not only pairing or mobbing that people need. They do sometimes need mentoring, or they need guidance, or they have an emotional issue and they need conflict resolution. They need a facilitator. They need a champion, a negotiator. There's a lot of roles that management often can play, good management, and I think they're very important. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thanks for your answer.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to go on here because I want to show you, I think I'm going to just quickly go to a bit of the case study on Flixbus. I'll just not comment, but show you a couple of other slides that I'll share with you. Oh, maybe I guess I should talk about them briefly. So some principles: being customer-centric, design the organization so that the voice of the customer goes straight through and back out with the feature as quickly as possible. build a culture of trust and respect. And you've already touched on that, some people with questions. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. This is from the Agile Manifesto. We're celebrating this week, 20th anniversary. A principle of being the employer of choice. So how can you create an environment, and in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, this is extremely important. I'm sure it's as hard as it's ever been to get good people. How do you become an employer where people want to work, where they have freedom, autonomy, but enough job safety? How are they feel supported? You know, going back to this initial conversation I like to have with management, are you willing to give people time to learn? When I negotiated with Flixbus for the team self-design event, I asked them, what if somebody wants to change their role? What if they want to become a UX person? They're currently a back-end developer. Will you give them time? Will you give them money to learn the new role? And they said yes, with limits, and we defined a policy in preparation for the flip of the organization. We tried to get answers to all the questions that might come up. That took 2 or 3 months. The actual reorganization happened in 1 day. We had 170 people come into a ballroom. We had team templates set up with circles of chairs. And in a day, these different departments all melted, disappeared, and people reformed as feature teams, 29 of them. And that was just a fantastic day. People were happier and remained happier than they had been for a very long time. And I think that's what makes me so excited about that particular technique. So I'll get to patterns and practices in just a minute.
So Greg, do you have slides that you're talking to? We're still looking at that less structure slide.
Oh, are you? Okay, just a second here. Do you see something that says less principles at the top?
No. We're still looking at the less.
Just a second here.
Mhm.
Do you see that now? It says principles at the top?
We do.
Okay, thank you. I think I was on a different slide than you were. So I
Yeah.
was talking about the middle part here about being the employer of choice, and then to be a learning organization. And if you don't know Peter Senge's work, The Fifth Discipline, thick book, really good book on being a learning organization, what you can do to help people learn, which means you have to let them make mistakes. It's like being a good parent. You have to let people safely try things and give them feedback. And then the principle of a sense of purpose, what motivating people. In big organizations, I've often found that people have lost a sense of meaning. They don't know why they're there. They just come to work because it's their job. They're trying to make a paycheck. And I find that customer intimacy for many increases a sense of purpose. Being on a long-lived team where you care about your teammates is another reason people come to work. They care about their teammates. Some patterns. So prefer feature teams that are customer-centric. Prefer team self-design. And I'll get into some more detail about that. But letting people choose with whom they're going to work and what they're going to work on. It's a tremendously liberating approach. Leadership should clarify and share the system level optimizing goals, what the company is trying to do differently. When I was at BMW with one of the groups, I talked to the CEO of the group I was with, and I said, what would you like to see as a result of the organizational change, the Agile adoption? What are the top 3 ranked from 1 to 3 changes that you want to see? And he didn't have to think about it very long. And he said, well, I want to deliver features, so produce. I want to see if less will work for our company. That was more experimental. That was number 2. And number 3 was, I want to improve the morale of our employees.
Greg, have you moved on from the principal slide?
Yes, did it not go with you?
No.
Okay, let's see what's happening here. Do you see it now?
We're looking at patterns now.
Okay. I was just talking about the third pattern there. Howard has his hand up, I think. Howard, did you want to ask something or say something?
Just exactly that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the help. High five to you. I have a little hand up too. The individual desires and preferences are reflected in the organization. So if the company you work at is a place where you can do what you want and what you prefer within the realm of what the company is trying to do, people are generally a lot happier and I think then more productive. So everybody's happy. Flatter hierarchies have less handoffs and less line. Line's a little bit of a strong word, but you probably know the term watermelon management. It's green on the outside, everybody says it's fine, and on the inside it's red and it's not going so well. That happens a lot more when you have a steep hierarchy. It's kind of a little story about the team that's suffering terribly, and the supervisor runs into the manager in the hallway, and the manager says, "Hey, Greg, how's your team doing?" "Well, it's having a hard time, Mark, but I'm really doing my best to keep things under control. We're working some late nights, and one guy's talking about quitting." "Okay, well, Greg, thanks. Good luck." And Mark is walking down the hall and goes into the conference room with the vice president of engineering, and it's Sally. Sally says, "Hey, Mark, how are things going?" "Well, pretty well in my department. You know, we have a really top department. Greg's team is having some trouble, and I'm not really sure if Greg's the right guy to lead that team, but I'm on it. I'm keeping track of it, and I'll check in with you again next month." And so then Sally walks into the boardroom and sees the CEO, and he wants to know how things are going in engineering. Everything's fine. Mark's area has one team that's having some trouble, but I'm sure Mark's up to it. And so, you know, the whole story gets distorted to the point that someone in a position to do something, which is usually farther up in the organization, doesn't have the knowledge they need to do something. So some companies don't decide to reorganize, and they might leave the structure in place with all the levels of hierarchy and all the departments. The result is that a lot of these bad things will still keep happening, even if you have teams and scrum masters and product owners. And if you have the ability to change the structure, flatten it, remove departments, and create management that is more cross-functional, focused on the customer and on the teams, you'll get a better result and a better organization. I'll go on here because there are some other things, but I want to get to the team self-design event and the example of. Now, I think you probably haven't seen. Do you see the practices screen?
No, nope.
I don't know why it doesn't share. Let's see again.
Is it possible to post the slide deck on the chat maybe? So we could save it, and even in case it plays up again, we could just refer to that.
Well, it would be, but it seems suboptimal to me to do that, just
Sure.
because we'll all be out of sync. But it's
Yeah.
thank you for the suggestion. I will share them afterwards. I don't have too many more slides to go through with you, and I'm going to be switching to another deck that I think will hopefully work better. These are just a few references on practices, and I will just shift gears here for a minute. And I'm going to go through. Let's see if this presentation mode works a little bit better, and we don't have to keep. I don't have to keep restarting it. All right. This is thanks to Flixbus, where I worked for about 9 months and organized and prepared an organizational redesign, and then we implemented that. Do you see the screen that says culture follows structure? Yeah, good. And now do you see a new screen? Good. Okay, I think it might have been the interaction of the other of Keynote versus PowerPoint, which I'm in now. So you want to let's assume that we want to create feature teams. We've got the idea that feature teams are more customer centric and we can get a faster turnaround time. And if we have them at scale, they can work together. The more they can load balance, the better you can handle variable demand for different types of features. The more comparable the teams are, the better. They'll still be all different, of course. And if teams can pull items instead of getting pushed work, they'll probably be happier and be able to do things they want to work on rather than what they were told to work on. So a lot of the change that I coach has to do with management letting go, not completely, but letting go of deciding who does what and focusing more on what needs to be done and letting people decide who does what and how they do it. So let's say now that we accept that and we want to follow one of the lines of the Agile Manifesto, individuals' interactions over processes and tools, and how do we form those teams? So Craig Larman, the co-author of Less, and Ahmed Fahmy, a close friend of mine, another Less trainer, published an article in 2013 about how to form teams using a self-design process. And the link is there that you can take a look at on the Scrum Alliance. By self-designing teams, people get to work on what they want to, and everyone has to do some dirty work. When the dirty work has to be done, you distribute it fairly among the teams. So this was an event in 2017. It's almost 4 years now since we did it. And it began with a statement by the co-founder about why this is occurring. So he and I worked together in the preparation of this over several months, and he assigned the head of product to work with me. And we had a series of meetings. In part of the preparation, we developed something I can't share with you actually, which is a detailed spreadsheet of how many teams per domain and effectively how the budget would be spent in the development organization. One of the goals you'll see was to create an organization that was business value focused rather than technology focused. The before state organization had a big group of PHP developers, another big group of content management people, another group of people who are working on specific mobile apps. And they basically had variable sizes. I think the PHP group was about 25 people. And all told, there were about 170 people in the organization in 3 sites. So we decided the business was complaining about IT not being very responsive. And we developed an alignment between business sponsors for groups of teams with an alignment between the business sponsor and the product owner to create a continuous alignment. Another option would have been to have the business sponsor be the product owner, but these business sponsors were very busy. And so this was the choice that we made. Second reason was create great technology. So there was a really important conscious development in clean code and refactoring, moving to microservices, reducing legacy code into much more manageable, simplified code. And that was overtly stated as a part of the initiative. And then finally, fostering self-organization. So there was a big belief in Flixbus, in the FlixTech group, that freedom was important to people, that they could choose what they would work on and in which domain, and that teams would have a stronger voice in the future. There were various iterations in the preparation of the event. And you can see these 7 different steps or different constituents in the organization who were consulted about what the blueprint ought to look like. There was a product development board, architects. There were chapters in existence already, another name for communities that represented different concerns technically. Former team leads, although they were no longer going to be in a team lead. They were consulted, as well as the product owners. And in this organization, instead of having the single product owner that Les suggests, they chose to keep product owners per team. And that meant that the product owners had to get together from time to time to align. It was just a decision that they made. And it worked fine. There's different ways to do that. So the goal was to get 29 teams in 11 different domains as a starting point. The company, as an aside, also realized that to meet the demand and their expected ambitions, they would need to grow by about 40% in terms of headcount over the next 12 months. So we made sure that there was capacity in the new organizational design to accommodate that 40% increase in headcount. There was also a thoughtful consideration of the site strategy. The company had offices in Munich and Berlin. And if you know Germany, people from Munich and people from Berlin are very different culturally. Although they're all Germans, they're very, very different. And there was some kind of a schism along those lines. And then there was a big outsourcing partner in Kharkov, Ukraine. And it was a long-term consulting relationship. The people in Kharkov, the Ukrainians, were some felt that they should be treated as outsourcers, kind of like a second order, and others felt that they should be treated as first citizens on an equal level. And the second view won out. So for this event, everyone from Kharkov was put on a plane and flown to Munich, where we had the event, and they were given the same freedom and choice as everyone who was internal. And that was kind of a fantastic flattening, maintaining a flat structure, even considering the outside consultants as part of the organization. It really helped the morale a lot. There was a very detailed agenda. It would not normally be so detailed, but we had a lot of people, and with that many people, really wanted to control time. There was also quite a bit of stress to make sure that the event would go well. So it was very well prepared. And you can see what the schedule is like here. So it begins with an overview. I gave a quick overview and an introduction for the event. And then the product owners and business owners gave a pitch for what would it mean to work on my team. Well, these teams at the beginning had no one on them. They were just a template, that they were going to recruit for from the existing staff. And there were 3 rounds of those. It took the whole morning up until lunchtime. And then I explained how the exercise would work and how would people physically decide which teams they work on. And it's a physical exercise where people move from the center of the room out to a specific team and then get feedback and then wash and rinse and repeat. So everyone comes back together again and then again takes another shot at it. In each iteration, you get feedback from stakeholders, product owners, management. Hey, it looks like all the really experienced PHP people are on this team. And how will the other teams be able to do PHP development items if all the skills are concentrated in one team? You guys need to break up. And there was that sort of feedback. So people hear the feedback. In each iteration where people decide where they're going to go, you ask the management and stakeholders to leave the room to give people a free space. And at the end of these 3 iterations, sometimes I do 4, depending on the situation, there's a decision point. It's quite important psychologically that these 3 decisions are explained up front. And then I'll get to that in just a moment. And then after the board, which as the top management maintains the right and responsibility to validate the new organizational design, if they give it a thumbs up or a yellow light, which is thumbs up with some qualifications, we need to go forward at that point. And starting the next day, there'll be new teams in a new organization. It flips over in one day. And the teams got to pick the Agile coaches. This is pretty new for a lot of companies, but in keeping with servant leadership, if no team wants you to be their leader, then why should you be a leader? And so there's a real possibility that some people, both managers and coaches, might no longer be doing that the next day. And then there was a kind of a startup process called Flix Ignition. We did a retrospective. Teams picked their names, took a photo, tweeted them to the rest of the group, and we then went to a beer hall and had a lot of beer and a lot of German food and dancing. It was quite a bit of fun. So the pitches are made, and I won't go into the pitches in detail. These are the three options. So A, worked well. Everybody's happy. The teams are formed. B, worked pretty well, but there's some improvements we have to address. We'll decide them on the spot. We might have to make some interventions. And 3, it didn't work, and you'll go back to the same team you were on before tomorrow. Maybe we'll try again at another time, or maybe the board will make decisions on which team you work on, and it won't be a team self-design. So that provides a little bit of an ominous air that, you know, come on, you guys, let's make this work. Provide some incentive. Each cycle is short, 30, 35 minutes. You have a setup of chairs, and I'll show you a video in just a second that might be a little easier to parse than the slides. Three cycles, you take a break, make a decision point, and in this case, it was option A. The teams were validated. There was a celebration. They picked their coaches. Now, there's different ways you can do this. It's kind of a sensitive topic. If the coaches are there and everybody's quite trusting, you can have them stand in the center of the room, and teams pick them round robin until there is no one left standing, or no one's picked, and if somebody's not picked, then they go back and join a team. Or you can do it through a ballot, a secret ballot, and then it's a little less pressure. They chose a secret ballot. Retrospective. We did a kind of a large-scale retrospective. It's something that I facilitate quite a bit in large-scale Agile. There's a lot of different techniques for it, and I won't go into it now, but this is a simple one that as people are walking out of the room, they can place a dot on this radar, and you could then get a sense of how satisfied they were, or that it was a complete fail, sort of like a scatter shot on a target. And then you close the event, and just a few other remarks about that event. So let me give you a little video. I'm going to show you a little bit what that looked like. Try and share that screen again. Let's see if this will play. Are you seeing that? So this is at the end of the 3 rounds, and people have taken their seats and they're now in new teams. In some cases, there's an avatar for people because they weren't there that day, or they were going to be hired later. Now you saw one set of empty chairs there, if I backed up a minute. What was interesting is that group decided that this team, I'll show you here, that team doesn't need to exist. So they not only designed the membership of the teams, they also decided that one of the teams there wasn't needed. It was a specific security team that they thought really could be done by the other teams. So I'm going to stop that share for a moment and see if you have other comments or thoughts. We have about 30 minutes left of the scheduled time here, and I'd like to use that, interactively with you based on things you'd like to talk about. I also could share with you a Miro. The training I'm going to do next week and the online training that I do, I use Miro, and it's pre-populated with a lot of content. So I could show you what it looks like, but I wouldn't, I decided not to use it interactively today with the size of the group we have. I thought it might be a little bit difficult to do that productively. But that's just an option for what we do with the remaining time.
Greg, I think you said you'd written a white paper on team self-selection. Can you is that the case, and can you paste the URL into the chat?
Yeah, I don't have it published, but I will share the URL afterwards. I've got to publish it. It's the white paper I have is actually the deck that I just showed on team self-design. There's also there's also a white paper that I didn't write, but Craig Larman and Bas Voda and Ahmad Fadi wrote. I mentioned that earlier in the presentation. Maybe that was the reference.
Yeah, was that on self-selection?
It was, yeah, 2013, published on the Scrum Alliance. So I'll publish that.
Sandy Memoli has written a book, and a colleague in New Zealand on team self-selection. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't seen that book, no. But I would like to. Can you paste the reference into the chat?
Yeah, it's a book called Creating Great Teams. I'll paste it in.
Okay, that sounds great. I would love to see that.
I'm curious, Greg, do you also know about the Team Topologies book and the Sooner, Happier, Safer, Happier books?
I know the Team Technology book, but Team Topologies book, but I don't know the other book you mentioned.
Let me send you the links.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any comments or questions?
I posted a couple in the chat, but I thought.
Okay, let me look at the chat because I haven't been doing that. Just a second here.
I was waiting for Ron to moderate.
Okay, so Ron, do you know where we are in here in terms of questions? I could start at the top.
I pretty much asked the questions at the through about 10 minutes ago.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. We're at about 10:20 then. Christina Rudolph.
Yes.
It looks like you had a question here. Small teams.
Yeah, I was just asking if you used Nexus, but
no, but I did recently have a chat with Richard from Scrum.org about Nexus. I used less, but you meant at Flixbus?
yes.
No, Flixbus used a kind of roll your own Agile variant that I've seen a few times in Germany, and it doesn't really have any name, but I've seen it more than once. It's they have a little bit of inspiration from Spotify and what Spotify has done. They had some inspiration from less. The VP of engineering, who gave up his direct reports, by the way, had worked in a German telecom where they had done another Agile transformation that he was inspired by. And they had a fair amount of coaching from myself and some other people. Alexei Kravitsky was one of them. And he's a Scrum trainer. They're just a few creative people, and it was a process that was designed for them. It wasn't a name framework. And let's see here. Maru, it looks like one of those big corporate events consulting companies organize. Well, in this case, it wasn't a consulting company. It was just me. And I was working alone. Well, I was working with some other coaches. So I guess we had 5 coaches. They were all from different companies. And it does look like one of those events, but it wasn't a show and tell. It actually changed the organization. And it was in a 700 square meter, so 7,000 square foot ballroom in a hotel. One of the funny things about this event was that some teams, in the consultation of people before the event, had team dogs, mascots, and they really wanted those dogs to be there. They said that, the dogs are members of the team, and it wouldn't be right if they were excluded. And the hotel unfortunately said that dogs were not okay to have on the property in that event. We were already kind of breaking some rules by having so many people in that room, and the dogs had to sit it out. So I guess, yeah, from David, it's a personal message. Are you talking about the group of people, or maybe?
Yeah, it didn't look very diverse. There was probably a couple of women. I think there was one black chap, I think, probably African, and then I think I saw one Indian guy. So it didn't seem a very diverse company.
Well, yeah, I guess it was a fairly young company. I've seen this, and it bothers me, but I've seen this in a lot of companies in Europe. I think there's less gender diversity in management, and it's true also in the less trainer community. It bothers me very much. There's not a single female less trainer. And if any, at the less conference, the last less conference we had, I made a pitch to the members, and I said, if any women would please get up on the stage and sit here with us less trainers. We need a little more diversity in our group, and you can be an acting less trainer. And a few women got up and sat with us, and I felt really good about that.
That's
But
good.
you know, it is an issue, and I'm glad you pointed it out. I think all we can do is each of us try to make sure there's not discrimination.
Yeah, I mean, it's more about communication, isn't it, and getting broader views, perspectives.
Yeah, I think diversity is fantastic. In fact, I think that Google in their research on teams has proven or demonstrated that teams produce better when they are more diverse. So we have to keep working at this.
I work in Germany. I've been living here for 20 years, and I grew up here as a kid, but I'm of African descent. And it's just demographics, you know. It's not. Plus, the work environment in tech companies is really not made to be attractive to anyone, let alone women. I think women are just smarter than guys, and they just don't want to go work there. And guys are a lot more technically oriented, especially young people. So that's the jobs that are there. It's not a horrible place to work, but it's just the culture is just like that. I mean, you cannot change the whole country in 5, especially if you're a minority, in 5 or 10 years. And so there's nothing like the US, and not comparable. I mean, by no means. And so, yeah.
Well, I'm happy to see change happening at the presidential and vice presidential level in the US, and we can all do our part. Not for tokenism, but for skill reasons, but also because I believe in diversity. My main co-facilitator at Flixbus was a woman, a German woman who lived there, and Claudia, who might have had to go back to her studies. She's doing a master's degree on ethics and organizational development, was my chosen coworker at Daimler, Mercedes-Benz. And I think they were a little surprised to see that this 60-year-old guy was bringing in a 20-something partner to work at the strategic level. And what they didn't realize is, you know, you look at the face and you think one thing, but if you read the master's thesis and you understand that she's written about organizational design and has had tremendously good insights on how to get better, healthier organizations, you think something quite differently. So, yeah.
It's also, again, another very cultural thing about Germany. I do not want to generalize, but it's very hierarchical, and so the same hierarchies that are implied by age, or enforced by age or by sex, are enforced on immigrants too. So even if you're second or third generation, there is this fundamental assumption that it cannot be by no means as good as a German-trained German person. That's just the case, and it's commonly accepted. And it's very rare that companies are global and have you can just count statistically the number of executives and you know, even the CEOs of big companies in Germany that are immigrant descent or non-German descent are very rare, and they usually come from, let's say SAP, they came from the US and they were chosen by somebody in the board because they wanted to turn around. But it's almost impossible to see somebody organically having been, let's say, promoted because of a, you know, let's say meritocratical orientation inside the organization. It's claimed everywhere, but it's not lived, and it's just, you know, the numbers will show you that. It's the way it is.
Well, I think that the little motto that I mentioned earlier, that culture follows structure, I think we need positive examples that are highly visible, that challenge traditional thinking, for people to open their minds. And some people, even in the face of evidence, it takes a long time for them to accept that evidence. So these are long haul changes, these cultural changes that we're talking about now in terms of diversity. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep working on them. Just means we should be very patient. And that's one of the things about talking about less briefly. There's two frameworks, less and less huge. And less is up to about 8 teams, and less huge can go up to hundreds of teams. And one thing we say about an adoption of less huge is you have to have a sense of humor and infinite patience. It's basically, long haul. It's as Jay was saying as we were beginning this evening, or this afternoon talk for you. His group and this meetup group deals with large company, complex, difficult change. So it's I don't know if we're actually masochistic or not, but we definitely like challenges, or we wouldn't do this kind of work. It's the kind of thing that takes steady effort and patience. And it also takes humility, realizing that you don't have all the answers, and you don't know all the problems. You don't know why things are the way they are. There's maybe one other slide that would be kind of interesting to share about why empiricism is an important principle. But I can just describe it. If this in the pie is what we know, and this other piece here is what we know, we don't know. The whole rest of the pie is what we don't know, we don't know. There's just a tremendous amount we don't know. And that's why empiricism is so important. We find out things by experience. So I see Michael's comment there about dodgeball. That is the case, yes, that a coach could do another role on the team if they're not selected. And it is sometimes it's pretty harsh, this selecting the agile coaches. It's a lesser of two evils situation. So you do what's comfortable, and that bad coach or bad manager stays in their role, and everybody's comfortable in the short run, but they still have to suffer under that person. Or you deal with the pain suddenly, you pull the tooth, and then it gets better because that person's now doing something that they're happier with. It's very hard when you're climbing the ladder to take a step off the ladder, or to take a step down. And there's a wonderful book on business agility. Just seeing if I have it on the bookshelf here. Well, I'll see. I'll post this a little bit later, because I don't want to take more time looking for it at the moment. But in this book, there's a story about 3 different scenarios where a mid-manager is not performing as well as they had been after a promotion. And in the first case, their manager says, Joe, you're just not performing as well as you had before. We're going to have to let you go. Fail. Second case, you're not performing as well as you had been. We're going to put you on a 6-month improvement plan, give you some coaching, some time to improve. And we hope you do. And if you do, it'll be great. And if not, in 6 months, we're going to have to let you go. So it's a little bit better. And then the third case, it looks like you're having difficulty. How's it going for you? It is difficult. I'm not really enjoying myself as much as I was before. Well, if you had a magic wand and you could use it and have a wish, what would your wish be? Well, I'd really like to go back to my old job. I enjoyed it. I did well at it. And this new job is not what I thought it would be. Okay, well, let's make that happen. We'll do a transition. You'll go back to the old job. No loss of face. Everything is smooth. The employee stays in the company, and everybody's happy. So there's so many different ways to deal with change, and some are humane and some are not. Michael, it looks like you were going to ask something or say something. Michael M.
So I was thinking about the change management processes, and somehow talking about the longer term process or ideas for maintaining the change and keeping that as part of the culture. uh, the change part of it usually is pretty quick and pretty easy, but sustaining it is a little bit more challenging. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think that it gets down to individual people and their beliefs rather than, acting in a new role but not really believing or not really feeling it. And it also gets down to the values of the organization and if they're aligned with the new structure. It has to do also with feedback cycles and whether people see the same thing. So you can all be in the same organization and experience the same period of time, but report very different experiences about what happened. And that tends to lead to divergence and pulling apart of a new change. When a new change is happened, things are fragile and they're not yet, it's like you break a bone and it's not fully healed yet. So you need physical therapy. And I think the analogy is somewhat fitting in an organization that is restructured and gone through change. People want to declare victory very early, and they need to remain attentive to the problems they had in the first place that might very well rear their ugly heads again. The teaching of systems thinking is an important part of change management for me. A very important part. So teaching people the ability to, as a group, go to a whiteboard, create a causal loop diagram, analyze a hairy, wicked problem, and instead of anchoring their position with one point of view or another, looking at it together so that it's our problem as a group, and as a group we can see the dynamics, and as a group we can decide how are we going to address the issue in an inclusive way. I think so. I think there's a lot of answers to that question of how to make sustainable change. It's ultimately a very hard thing to do, especially if you have a regime change. So if you have one top manager and that manager sponsored the change and then they leave the organization, if you could very easily lose it. I worked with mentioned Alcatel-Lucent. I don't know if I mentioned it was the 4G LTE product that had this huge number of 10,000 developers. And they had 5 CEOs in 4 years. Eventually, Nokia bought Alcatel-Lucent. And it's very hard to make resident in the DNA of an organization a new way of thinking when you've spent time with someone who then leaves and a new guy comes in who has another way of thinking. So by flattening the organization, I think it's more likely that you will persist the change. At BMW and the autonomous driving group, the initial executive sponsor of that change, which was a huge change, was nearing retirement. And so they recruited a new replacement. And as he cared very much about it, he stayed on and he paired with this new guy for 3 months. And they worked side by side. And that was a pretty good way to transition thinking and leadership from one person to another. I know that happened at ThoughtWorks also when Roy Singham, the founder of ThoughtWorks, decided that he wanted to become less operational and be supported in the growth when they were over 1,000 people. He hired Trevor Mathers from Accenture, who was a partner. And Roy just assumed, these Accenture's guys, they don't get it. They don't understand our DNA, how we work as an agile company. And so for 1 year, all the emails that we got were from Trevor and Roy pairing. And they paired the entire year. And I think, that you have to keep trying things to try to reach the sweet spot and how you persist change in a novel way. Someone else was wanting to ask a question or make a comment.
It's Howard Dickoff.
Okay. Hi, Howard. Please go ahead.
He doesn't react. He's on mute.
Okay. Okay. I see a question here from Victor about after the team self-forming exercise, how many teams were more or less the same? None of them were really the same. I'd say maybe 4 or 5 out of 29 were 80% the same. One of the big differences was the size constraints were very different. So there was no constraint on the size of teams before, and we had a minimum and maximum. We had a skill diversity by team. When you get into more detail in the blueprint, you have to be sure that the problem you set up is a solvable problem. If you have a pie in the sky wishful organizational design of 2 devs, a tester, a UX, and a person with architectural and some other esoteric skill on every team, but you don't have that many people, you won't be able to solve the problems. One of the iteration feedback cycles is, okay, well, we don't actually have all the skills that we thought would be needed on this team, but we believe we can learn them, and will you give us the help to do that? And so there were little conversations during the feedback loops about, yes, we will, or no, we won't, or we think that's reasonable, or we don't think that's reasonable. The outcome of that event is that you have really good alignment between the kind of the strategy and the practices of the teams. People know each other, and not only within the team, but across the teams. So probably the greatest way to liberate a lot of happiness in a single day that I've ever seen. I've done that maybe 15 times with different organizations. That was the biggest one I'd ever done, but I've done it many times with a group of 4 to 8 teams. I think feedback, Michelle Riyad Nabti asked a question here. To what extent do you think continuous and ongoing feedback to managers could help? I think absolutely essential feedback. Going back to ThoughtWorks, which is really a company I would recommend if you don't know them, at least to study them, if not to work there for a while. It's a feedback culture. So you may not know who you work for, but anyone can and does give you feedback. And if you're not really receptive to that feedback, you'll probably get a call from Roy. At least that happened to me. He said, Greg, you're not really taking the feedback as much as you ought to be. We're going to give you some extra feedback this next month. And it was like, you change pretty rapidly. So if people don't give it to you, it's always good to ask for feedback. And I need to ask for your feedback today. I know there was a fair amount of slides, maybe not as interactive as it might have been, but I would like your feedback anyway.
Greg, this is Michelle Nabti. I guess the question is, in terms of of an early career or Agile Scrum manager, like oftentimes they're not getting any type of formal development or learning when they start in that role. And you mentioned a little bit about servant leadership, and to what extent is the role does feedback need to move up within the team in order for that manager to adapt and adjust their approach so that they can serve the needs of the team most effectively?
I think to a very large extent. I guess not only does the feedback from the team to the new Agile leader or Agile manager need to flow, it needs to be, for that to happen, you need to have an occasion for it to happen. There's some limitations in Scrum by the book or any framework by the book. The team retrospective at the end of the sprint in single team Scrum optionally includes managers. Normally it's the team, and the team can invite who they want. The way many people practice it, the product owner and the Scrum Master are present, but if there's someone in a kind of Agile manager role, they may not be invited. And I would highly encourage inviting them, not them imposing their presence, but being invited. And if they're not invited, to schedule a separate retrospective with some team members and the manager on a regular basis. And that's not the normal team retro, it's a separate retro, but they're very useful. Going back to the Flixbus example, they had a kind of leadership development process with the head of HR, and they invited me in to do an Agile leadership workshop one evening. And I did that, and I gave some people some individual coaching. And then talking about the BWin Party company where I was for a couple of years, I did a pretty intensive intervention with the HR department. And the head of HR, Kathy Swinley, who was 3,000 person company, a senior executive, multi-site teams she had. She became a sponsor and a deeply involved in the LESS transformation. and she invited me in to coach all of the HR departments, and they all formed Kanban teams that were cross-functional. And if it was payroll time, they'd work together to get payroll done. If it was recruiting, they'd work together to do recruiting. They'd work together to do reviews. And it was just beautiful for the HR specialists, because most HR people want to become the head of HR, but the only way they can do that is they know all the other dimensions of HR. And in a typical HR department, they might not get that exposure. So that was one benefit. And another benefit was, by understanding agility directly firsthand, they were better at recruiting Agile and understanding Agile people. One of the Agile coaches actually had been an HR partner, and she became a great coach. Very good people skills. What was this about Donald Rumsfeld?
Oh, sorry. At one point, you said something about kind of known knowns, and
Oh, is that a
just
Donald
prompted
Rumsfeld?
that quote to me.
Oh my God, I wasn't aware that I was blaspheming.
The quote's great. He's a jerk, but the quote's
Yeah,
great.
you're right. It's good to separate things. All right. What else do we have here? Anyone want to spontaneously bring something up?
I had a question I kept for myself the whole time, Greg. The whole time I was listening to you, I was thinking about the environment in which I've evolved the last 20 years, and I have to say I myself fell a victim almost every time to psychological safety issues. I've discovered since 2 years this beautiful term I can hide under, but I just don't have the patience, nor the energy, nor the courage to go over all this friction that emerges every time you have a contrarian opinion about what your leaders want to do with the organization. You can't even engage in discussion. So at some point, not just me, but almost everybody I've worked with just resolved and accepted and just put their heads down and just decided to make the best out of their job, knowing that the organization was not going in the best way, and seeing executives change every 2-3 years, but nobody spoke a word, and everybody knew, had even propositions to make. So what would you say in regard to culture follows organization, this work you presented in the first part and about Flixbus, with regard to this aspect of the safety for people to speak up, speak out?
I think it's why top down and bottom up are essential principles in an effective transition in a large company. So if the top management doesn't want to change the company, then the other people might need to change the company. So if you can't change the company, change the company. Sometimes you have to vote with your feet and leave. I used to think when I was younger, as a kind of revolutionary, that you should never give up and you should keep on trying, and eventually, if you keep on trying, you'll be able to make a change. And I've just seen too many good people put down by despots, by kind of leaders that don't get it, or they don't want to get it, and they're not going to get it. There's a big bank that I won't name here in Paris. I've gone in there 3 or 4 times, and I've come to believe that the culture just really is bad, and they really don't want to change, and they pay lip service to it, but they're not serious about it. And I think in California, I felt there was a much bigger belief in the possibility of change, and optimism, and a real willingness to change. It's a wonderful thing about the West Coast. And in Europe, it's more the old world. People are more resigned to accept things the way they are. And it really requires stamina. It's really hard. I understand, I think, what you're getting at, Maru. And it's surround yourself with people who are optimistic and give you energy, and take it easy on yourself and be patient, I guess.
Hey, Greg, it's Jay. So I'm going to put my Scrum Master hat on and say we're about out of time. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining. A special thank out or shout out goes to Greg for doing this. And if you want to take his courses, I highly recommend it. He's a great educator and trainer. He takes his time, and make sure you understand some of the stuff that they talk about, because some of it's kind of hard to get, in my opinion, because it was for me. I have a hard nugget. So thank you, everyone. Look up Greg. He's very friendly. You can ask him anything. I'll send out the recording in a couple days, and his deck. He'll send me the deck, and I'll send that out too. If you have any questions, reach out to me or anyone on our team. Also, don't forget to go to Agile 20 Reflect Festival and look at the 600 plus events that you may want to go to in the month of February. It's only for the month of February. We're going to have 5 more. Our community, San Francisco Enterprise, Agile Enterprise is going to have, I think, 5 more this month. God, I should know this because I created them. So stay tuned, and there's many more. Again, thank you, Greg, very much. Bonjour.
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 And I just a standing invitation. If you are in Paris, I'll offer you your choice of a nice glass of wine or a coffee. And when I'm in San Francisco, I'd love to see your meetup in person. I thought that we were going to actually be doing this next week in person as you'd originally invited me. So say hello to everybody for me if you see them. And I hope I was okay tonight. I as I said, I had a personal factor that might have affected my presence a bit, but I hope that it was okay for you. So if you have can I get like a fist of 5 if you're still on video? 5, it was great. 1, it sucked. 3, it was okay. Give me a little bit of visual feedback. You guys are really nice. Feel sorry for me. No, you're nice. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Greg.
Greg, do you do Airbnb? We'll just come over and stay with you. Is that okay?
Yeah, I've got a spare room, and I bought a little country house recently where I'm going to go tomorrow and do some soul searching and some remodeling.
Works, and we'll get the bottle of wine as well.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Thanks much. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoy the festival.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.